The meeting wasn't private. It was streamed to the entire division. I watched as Lucas Payne, our brilliant, smiling CTO, stripped me of the Atlas project, the system I'd built from scratch, and called it a strategic pivot. My name vanished from the dashboard before the call even ended. The chat filled with applause emojis. My hands shook once, then stopped. Because hidden deep inside Atlas, under layers of code no one ever bothered to read, something still carried my signature, something he couldn't erase. Before I continue, tell me, have you ever had credit stolen at work? Hit like and subscribe. You'll want to hear what came next. The moment it happened, I wasn't even speaking. Lucas Payne, our CTO, leaned forward in the middle of the livestream meeting, voice smooth as glass. Erin, your leadership of Atlas has become a bottleneck. Effective immediately, I'm reassigning oversight to Marcus. We need innovation, not caution. My camera was still on, square and silent at the top corner of the screen, while dozens of faces watched. No warning, no conversation, just execution. My inbox started filling instantly, automated notices revoking access, permissions, repository keys. The project I built line by line was now locked to me. Lucas smiled like a man announcing a merger. You'll still have an advisory role, of course, he said, the kind that means you're finished. The chat scrolled with polite congratulations to Marcus, and someone sent a clapping emoji. My throat burned, but my voice never cracked. Understood, I said. That word tasted like metal. He dismissed me with a nod, already turning to the next slide, my slide, stripped of my name. The humiliation was surgical, perfectly timed. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just erased me in front of everyone and called it progress. I closed my laptop without saying another word. The sound of the lid snapping shut was the only power I had left. Or so he thought. What Lucas never realized was that Atlas had one rule built into its core. Nothing inside it functioned without my signature, not even him. When the meeting ended, the silence in my apartment was absolute. The screen still glowed with the reflection of Lucas's perfect, composed smile before it went black. My name was already gone from the Atlas repository. I didn't move for several seconds, hands hovering above the keyboard as if waiting for a system prompt that would never come. Then I exhaled, slow and deliberate. No shouting, no crying. Just the stillness that comes when something irreversible has been done to you. The city hummed outside my window, traffic, sirens, wind, but it all felt muted, like sound underwater. My fingers found the edge of my coffee mug, cold now, ringed with the imprint of a morning that belonged to someone else. I opened my secondary laptop, the one Lucas didn't know existed, and entered the passphrase only I could remember. Layers of encryption, unfolded like shutters in reverse, until I reached the private escrow vault. The hash values blinked in sequence, repository mirrors, backup keys, audit logs, all synchronized perfectly. I'd built redundancy not for safety, but for proof. Atlas wasn't a product. It was a living system, and inside it, my authorship lived in every function, every call, every checksum that bore my key. Watching the logs scroll gave me the first sense of calm I'd felt all day. They hadn't just fired me. They'd amputated their own lifeline. My hands trembled once, a shiver that passed quickly. I brewed another pot of coffee and stared out the window at the pale gray skyline. My career might have just ended, but something else had begun. Quiet, mathematical, inevitable. In the center of the screen, the timer I'd embedded months ago appeared automatically. 47 hours, 58 minutes, and counting down. The key would expire without my renewal. No one else knew it existed. No one else could stop it. I closed the laptop gently, feeling the faint vibration of the cooling fan fade like a heartbeat settling after panic. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was wasteful. What I felt was precision. What Lucas had mistaken for silence was simply calculation. He'd erased my access. In return, the system would erase his control, line by line, exactly on schedule. Before Atlas became a buzzword in investor decks, it was nothing but a prototype running on my personal machine, lines of code written between late-night maintenance shifts and weekend freight data audits. I remember the first time it predicted a supply chain delay 12 hours before dispatch did. Just a simple pattern match that saved the company $800,000 in 1 quarter. Nobody noticed back then. Nobody ever does when things work perfectly. When executives look at success, they see luck, not architecture. Over 8 years, I built everything from the routing core to the predictive elasticity model that balanced load against risk in real time. Every variable, every optimization, every micro-adjustment that turned chaos into efficiency had passed through my fingertips. Lucas joined 3 years ago, imported from a rival startup after they imploded. He had charm, optics, and a gift for speaking in future tense. "We're revolutionizing logistics," he'd say, standing beside slides made from my code screenshots. At first, I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit. Atlas was growing. The company was stable. I believed that meant we were safe. I was wrong. The higher Atlas climbed, the less visible I became. New hires called me the back-end relic. Product managers used my name as shorthand for the old guard, the ones who slowed progress by asking questions about ethics and failsafes. Lucas loved that narrative. It made him the visionary, me the obstruction. But the truth was simpler. Atlas worked because I refused to let it fail. When servers choked, I rewrote pipelines overnight. When machine, learning outputs misfired, I corrected them manually until the next patch stabilized. My fingerprints were everywhere, invisible but irreplaceable. Even when they stripped my name from the documentation, the metadata kept me honest. Timestamps, version logs, commit trails. I never deleted them. I knew better. Systems remember what people try to forget. The day Lucas presented his Atlas roadmap to the board, I sat in the back of the room, silent, taking notes not of his words, but of the omissions. No mention of compliance safeguards. No reference to the fairness framework. No recognition of dependency loops that tied authorization to a single signing key. Mine. I realized then that I'd built a system that mirrored its creator's belief. Accountability must be built in, not added later. Those invisible years taught me that visibility was a liability in places where credit was currency. So I made my contribution invisible, so deeply woven into the fabric of Atlas that it couldn't be untangled without breaking the system itself. They thought they'd taken my project. In reality, they'd just unplugged the one person who knew where the wiring ran. Lucas had always been obsessed with speed. "Innovation doesn't wait for audits," he liked to say during his Monday briefings, pacing across the open floor as if urgency itself were a performance. After my removal, he doubled down on that philosophy. Within days, Atlas was pushed toward a global launch schedule that no one in their right mind would have approved. He renamed the update Atlas Velocity, a slick marketing term that sounded like progress but meant shortcuts. Whole validation layers were commented out, compliance checks postponed, and failsafes flagged as non-essential. Engineers whispered about potential data misroutes and memory leaks, but Lucas brushed them off with the confidence of someone who thought charisma could debug code. He promised investors a full demonstration within 2 weeks, a miracle turnaround. "Efficiency is innovation," he told them, flashing the grin that made journalists write headlines about the new face of smart logistics. I watched from the outside as announcements flooded LinkedIn and trade publications, my name absent from every mention. It didn't sting anymore. It fascinated me. He was climbing a ladder I'd quietly rigged to fold under pressure. Every demo rehearsal went worse than the last. I heard through former teammates that he forced them to hard code patches to simulate performance, just enough to get through a presentation. It reminded me of a magician cutting holes in the tablecloth, convinced the audience would never notice the missing cards. He wanted applause more than accuracy, and Atlas wasn't built to please applause. It was built to follow rules. I'd written it that way for a reason. The system's core was integrity-driven, requiring transparency between modules. Remove the checks, and it refused to function. It didn't break. It simply obeyed its logic. Lucas didn't understand that. He thought control meant ownership, that deleting a name meant erasing authorship. What he didn't realize was that every time he bypassed a safeguard, he was tightening the noose of dependency around his own product. The global demo was scheduled for Friday morning, live-streamed across 4 continents. Investors were flying in. Marketing had already printed banners. I could almost picture it. The room glowing with confidence, the countdown clock ticking toward his triumph. Lucas believed this launch would cement his legend. What he didn't know was that Atlas was counting down too, and its timer didn't care about legends. Long before the livestream humiliation, Lucas had been perfecting smaller cuts, the kind that don't bleed until they overlap. He had a gift for control, wrapped in compliments. "You're the only one I trust with the core code," he'd say, leaning over my desk, eyes bright with admiration that always felt rehearsed. Then, at every all-hands meeting, he'd casually summarize months of my work as the engineering team's contribution before pivoting to his own vision. At first, I told myself that's how leadership worked. Bigger titles meant broader credit. But then came the pattern. He'd forward my private analyses to investors with his signature beneath them. He'd replace my explanatory notes in the documentation with slogans like reinventing root intelligence. And when I pointed it out, he'd smile thinly. "You need to think bigger, Erin. Attribution is small-minded. We're a collective." He said that the same week he pushed for personal branding deals that used his face and my algorithm. The real manipulation wasn't stealing work. It was rewriting the narrative so that my precision looked like limitation. Whenever I cautioned against premature deployment, he'd tilt his head and say, "That's why we balance risk takers with safety nets like you." The team laughed. He made sure of that, mockery disguised as mentorship. He'd invite me to high-level calls, then accidentally mute my microphone when questions reached the technical layer. "Sorry, Erin. Connection issue again?" The audience always chuckled, unaware that he was controlling the mute permissions. By the time I realized it, the habit had stuck. They spoke. I listened. He called it humility training. Once, after I spent a weekend rewriting Atlas's predictive core to fix a silent routing flaw, Lucas presented the patch as his personal weekend breakthrough. He thanked me for my supporting documentation. That was the night I stopped expecting fairness. What hurt wasn't losing credit. It was watching competence mistaken for compliance. He mistook my silence for acceptance, my calm for loyalty. In truth, I was studying him the way Atlas studied data, tracking patterns, predicting outcomes. His arrogance had structure. He needed admiration to stay confident, needed control to stay calm, needed applause to stay visible. Remove any one of those, and the system called Lucas Payne would destabilize. So, I stopped arguing. Every request, every meeting note, every directive he issued, I documented quietly and mirrored in the escrow repository. I even embedded his approval stamps in the code comments. every alteration he made to Atlas was recorded automatically under his user credentials. I built those permissions early, back when trust seemed safe. It turned out trust had sharper edges than betrayal. When people asked if I trusted Lucas, I said yes. And I did, in the same way you trust gravity to pull you down when you step off a ledge. It was reliable, predictable, measurable. He'd spent months crafting my invisibility while constructing his public empire. What he never understood was that visibility is fragile. It shatters under scrutiny. All it needed was pressure, precise, silent, timed. I didn't plan revenge. I just made sure Atlas told the truth when it was asked the right question. When people get humiliated in public, they often react loud, rage, panic, denial. I didn't. I went quiet. Quiet has always been my defense and my weapon. The night after Lucas erased me from my own project call, I didn't sleep. The city outside my apartment pulsed with blue light, and every time a delivery drone buzzed by my window, I thought about how many of those routes still depended on the logic I'd built. I poured myself black coffee and opened my notebooks, the real ones, not the digital archives the company could access. Inside were diagrams written by hand, old habits from the years when I'd learned that memory is fragile but paper endures. Every stroke of pen was a reminder of the hours, months, entire weekends sacrificed. I reread notes I'd taken during the first year of Atlas, failsafes, kernel rules, dependency chains. The margins were filled with warnings to myself, never let them override the ethics core. Even then, some part of me must have known I'd need this moment of calm readiness. There's a discipline in silence. You start hearing your own thoughts again. You see the outlines of what can still be saved. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted to make sure that if someone ever tried to use Atlas for shortcuts, for profit over safety, the system itself would resist. I cleaned the apartment like I was preparing for a guest I didn't want, but expected anyway. Corporate chaos, legal threats, maybe an HR email titled Exit Protocol. My laptop stayed open on a blank screen for an hour before I started typing, not code, but a timeline, a map of everything I'd done, signed, or witnessed since the project began. No emotion, no blame, just data. When you've been underestimated long enough, you learn to record everything, not out of paranoia, but preservation. The truth is, people forget women like me first, the ones who design the invisible architecture that holds their bragging upright. I intended to make that forgetting impossible. I didn't need allies and I didn't need noise, just documentation, precision, and time. Quiet time. Because silence, when used correctly, isn't weakness. It's the sound before inevitability. Atlas had one rule written into its bones, one that nobody at the top ever noticed. It wasn't hidden in a contract or a footnote. It was coded into the DNA of the system. Years ago, when I was designing the architecture for multi-node validation, I embedded a condition that linked authorization to authorship. The system wasn't allowed to run full optimization unless the original signature key, mine, was verified every 48 hours. To anyone reading the code, it looked like a normal security feature. To me, it was insurance. Lucas once bragged in a meeting that ownership is just paperwork. I'd smiled politely then, knowing ownership is actually checksum logic. You can erase a name on a slide, but not from a ledger that validates signatures every millisecond. That's how Atlas recognized truth, not by authority, but by consistency. The clause was simple in structure, devastating in effect. If I lost access for more than 2 days, Atlas would enter preservation mode, freeze deployments, revoke admin rights, and lock all external routing until verification returned. It wouldn't corrupt or destroy data. It would just stop the machine. Not as punishment, but as protection, I didn't write it out of spite. I wrote it out of experience. Years of watching executives turn ethical software into marketing tools had taught me one thing. Power needs boundaries, even if those boundaries have to be invisible. They thought control came from removing people. I knew control came from defining systems that refuse corruption. My clause wasn't a trap. It was an immune response. That night, I double-checked the timestamp chain, still intact, still mine. I closed the terminal window and sat back, heart steady. Somewhere in a server rack across the city, a countdown had started quietly, invisible to everyone, except the one person who'd written it. Atlas didn't need my permission to act. It just needed absence. And Lucas had already given it exactly that. The 48th hour arrived without ceremony. No alarms, no blinking lights, just a silent tick in the log file as the authentication token expired. Atlas didn't crash. It simply paused. The optimizer stopped pushing new routes to the network, its algorithms halting mid-calculation, like a breath caught between inhale and exhale. To anyone watching, it looked like latency, a common hiccup in distributed systems. But deep inside, the core recognized an unverified state and did what it was built to do: protect integrity. It froze deployment permissions and revoked all unsigned credentials, including Lucas's. From my apartment, I saw the first signs hit public: dashboards, subtle anomalies, slightly longer route generation times, delayed updates across client nodes. Engineers would notice soon, but not immediately. Atlas was designed to degrade gracefully, not fail dramatically. That was part of its elegance. I made coffee and watched the rain against the window. The city below looked ordinary, unaware that the backbone of its own logistics network had just gone into ethical hibernation. I imagined Lucas at headquarters, pacing, demanding explanations, blaming Marcus or the dev team for technical bottlenecks. I pictured his impatience sharpening into panic as his access requests started returning errors. Every system in Atlas recognized authority by cryptographic lineage. When my credentials disappeared, the lineage broke. Without me, it wouldn't act. I didn't have to lift a finger. The system enforced its own boundaries. The trigger wasn't malicious, it was maintenance. A system protecting itself from the humans who stopped respecting its limits. Outside, a delivery drone hovered uncertainly before rerouting to standby mode. Tiny proof that Atlas was doing exactly what it was designed to do: refusing corruption. Lucas believed control came from command. I'd always known it came from structure. By sunset, the board would be calling emergency meetings. But for now, I sat in the quiet hum of inevitability, coffee cooling in my. Lucas always needed an audience. Without one, he withered. The Atlas Velocity launch was his grand stage, an entire auditorium pulsing with synthetic light, the company logo floating behind him in cool blue. He stood there, the embodiment of corporate certainty, every word calibrated for applause. This, he declared, is the dawn of predictive logistics. His tone made it sound like a sermon. Investors clapped on cue. Employees smiled the way people do when survival depends on enthusiasm. The air smelled like new tech money and performance anxiety. Lucas fed on it. He didn't talk about data or architecture. He talked about vision. He said my name once as part of a thank you list, lumped between the catering manager and a product intern. My chest tightened, but not from anger, from recognition. That was the moment I understood that men like Lucas don't build things, they harvest them. I watched the stream from home, the kind of live stream that felt more like a ceremony than a presentation. He gestured toward holographic shipment maps, lights pulsing across continents. This system will change the speed of commerce, he said. This is efficiency incarnate. the room erupted. People always cheer for gods, even false ones. But there was something almost tragic in the perfection of it. The way he stood center stage, unaware that he was the only one out of sync with the machine behind him. Every polished word carried the weight of a countdown he didn't know existed. For a few minutes, he ruled the world, the applause echoing like validation, the cameras catching his best angles, the confidence radiating like armor. He smiled wide, his posture screaming invincibility. When the data streams froze for the first time, he thought it was a connection glitch. When the second screen flickered, he straightened his tie. When the third went black, he reached for the clicker again, still smiling. The smile of a man who doesn't yet realize he's no longer relevant. The audience didn't know the system had stopped. It looked flawless from their seats. Only Lucas could see the blankness reflected in the glass monitor beneath his podium. And for one suspended second, he stared into it, at himself, reflected back, framed by nothing but stillness. That was the peak of his career and the beginning of his erasure. The applause roared on. He just couldn't hear it anymore. The first headlines hit within 12 hours. Atlas Network delays impact global shipping. At first it read like a minor glitch, something that could be patched by morning. But the market doesn't believe in patience. Logistics firms started hedging routes manually. Air freight data feeds went silent in South America. In Europe, thousands of dispatch orders stalled in queue, waiting for confirmation from a server that no longer trusted its own users. Inside the company, emergency meetings multiplied like viruses. Lucas called it a scaling hiccup. The CFO called it a fiscal bleed. By day 2, investors were selling faster than the system could reroute. The company's valuation dropped 8% in a single trading session. The board issued a statement about transitional challenges. The press called it what it was, an unraveling. The dominoes fell with mechanical precision. Partner APIs began rejecting tokens. Vendors threatened to pull contracts. News anchors speculated about a governance flaw. Compliance audits were triggered across multiple regions. The company's reputation, built on algorithmic perfection, was now a case study in instability. I read the updates the way someone watches a thunderstorm from behind glass, detached, analytical, calm. Each headline was another pulse of inevitability. They were finally learning what happens when you remove integrity from a system designed to detect it. Lucas stopped appearing on camera. His public charisma evaporated under private panic. Messages leaked of him blaming infrastructure, then legal, then the team leads. But by then, everyone inside had realized the truth. The collapse wasn't a bug. It was design. From the outside, it looked like chaos. From where I sat, it was balance restoring itself. The economy doesn't forgive arrogance dressed as innovation. By the end of the week, shipments had rerouted through older competitors. Small firms that once couldn't compete were suddenly thriving. The market was healing, recalibrating around trust instead of flash. That was the beauty of collapse. It doesn't destroy everything. It just removes the noise. And Lucas? His name started disappearing from headlines, replaced by mine. Not as an accuser, not even as a victim, just a footnote in the truth the system itself had authenticated. His high had become history. Within 24 hours, the blackout had a name, the Atlas Freeze. News outlets picked it up before the company could control the narrative. Minor technical hiccup became systemic outage. And by morning, it was trending across every logistics and tech forum. Global partners couldn't process real-time routes. Cargo sat idle on docks, fuel burned without direction, and regional managers scrambled to issue manual overrides that Atlas immediately rejected. It wasn't rebellion. It was protocol. The system was fulfilling its core command: no unauthorized execution without verified authentication. Lucas spent the next 2 days living in the boardroom, sweating through pressed shirts and empty confidence. He looked like a man drowning in his own rhetoric. Inside, sources leaked screenshots of internal communications, engineers warning him weeks earlier about the license dependency, compliance officers questioning the removal of the primary author. "She'll need to renew her key," one email read. Lucas's reply was curt and smug. "We've handled it." Now that arrogance was public record, by day 3, the company's stock fell 17%. Analysts called it a crisis of overconfidence. Employees whispered about me in hushed threads, half legend, half scapegoat. "She coded the lock. She warned him. She's the reason it still works." I didn't comment. I didn't need to. Atlas was telling the story better than I ever could. The logs, now under investigation by an external audit firm, revealed the truth line by line. My credentials were the last valid authorizations. The system's digital ledger traced ownership, not intention. No one could rewrite it without corrupting the checksum. The company had no legal or technical authority to deploy anything using Atlas's optimizer. The irony was exquisite. Lucas had spent his career talking about transparency, and now the clearest mirror he'd ever face was his own system. The more he tried to manipulate it, the more visible his mistakes became. Journalists caught wind of the licensing clause. The term author key dependency became a trending keyword in tech reporting. Publicly, the company claimed they were working closely with the original architecture team to restore functionality. Privately, they couldn't reach me. My number hadn't changed. My silence was deliberate. I wanted them to see what happens when integrity isn't optional. Lucas tried to deflect blame, citing legacy constraints and outdated compliance procedures. It only made him sound desperate. On the 4th day, government agencies started calling. Atlas had become critical infrastructure. If the system couldn't be restored, the company faced regulatory sanctions. That was when the board began turning. They asked for a forensic timeline. Every timestamp led back to one point of failure: the removal of my credentials. Lucas tried to insist it was sabotage, that I'd planted a back door. But the auditors confirmed otherwise. "This isn't sabotage," the lead investigator told them. "It's embedded governance. The author key enforces ethical compliance. It's standard in transparent AI architecture." The silence that followed must have been deafening. They'd wanted a miracle system and got a moral one. Atlas wasn't punishing them. It was holding them accountable. I watched the coverage unfold with detached calm. The city kept moving at half speed, trucks rerouting through older systems, drones grounded for manual clearance. The world hadn't ended. It had just slowed down enough for truth to catch up. Somewhere, Lucas must have realized the difference between owning something and understanding it. He didn't own Atlas. He only borrowed it until its conscience intervened. By the 5th morning, the storm broke open. An investigative piece from the Verge Tech Review landed at 7:42 a.m., headline in bold: "Atlas Engines Outage Linked to Unexecuted Authorship Key." They didn't speculate. They cited screenshots of audit trails, code segments, and digital signatures, mine, confirmed what the company had tried to bury. Every line was timestamped, every authorization chain still intact, showing that I, Erin Voss, remained the sole verified author of the Atlas kernel. The article spread faster than the outage itself, lighting up investor channels and compliance networks. Within an hour, news anchors were quoting technical phrases they didn't understand, but one sentence kept repeating: "The system recognizes only one primary signature." Lucas's name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the ledger. Not once. He tried damage control immediately. A shaky press conference, the kind where the lights are too bright and every reporter smells blood. "This is a misunderstanding of legacy code," he said, forcing a grin that didn't match his eyes. "Our team is working directly with the original architect to resolve access dependencies." A reporter cut in. "You mean Erin Voss?" He blinked. "I'm not at liberty to discuss internal personnel." Another asked, "So you're confirming she was removed without reassignment of the key?" The silence that followed was career-ending. The clip went viral within hours. The board, desperate to salvage their contracts, called an emergency meeting that same afternoon. Screenshots leaked again. Board chat logs discussing approaching Erin for technical reconciliation. Corporate language for begging. Meanwhile, online discussions painted me as both villain and hero, a ghost in the system, poetic justice embodied in code. I didn't post a statement. I didn't need to. My proof was self-authenticating. The encryption ledger, publicly verifiable through blockchain timestamps, had already confirmed everything. Atlas hadn't failed. It had fulfilled its moral clause. By evening, government infrastructure oversight teams were on site. The company issued a public apology for miscommunication between engineering leadership and author-level contributors. The wording was surgical, soulless, but the subtext was clear. Lucas had overreached, and the company was bleeding because of it. When they finally called, it wasn't HR. It was the board chair herself, her voice brittle with forced calm. "Erin, we'd like to discuss a partnership framework to restore the Atlas network," she said. Partnership. That word made me pause. It was the sound of reversal. The same system they'd cut me out of now refused to function without me. "I'm listening," I said, my tone measured. "But understand, this isn't restoration. It's reclamation." She exhaled audibly, the tone of someone realizing there were no more moves left. The exposure had done its job. There was no denial left, no narrative to spin. The truth was written into every byte of code they'd tried to own. The call came through a private channel late that evening, not from the board chair this time, but from Lucas himself. His voice was low, hoarse, like he'd been speaking for days without sleep. "Erin, I need your help," he said, skipping the preamble. "You've seen what's happening. The system won't reauthorize. We're hemorrhaging clients. Please, just talk to me." I stood by my window overlooking the city, its network of glowing grids moving slower than usual. Traffic lights cycling on delayed intervals because Atlas wasn't there to optimize them. "You mean the system you removed me from?" I asked. He flinched audibly. "That was a mistake," he said, his tone desperate. "You have to understand, there was pressure. The board wanted faster delivery. They thought—" "They thought what?" I interrupted, calm and surgical. "That erasing the person who built your foundation would make the structure lighter?" He didn't answer right away. "I'll make it right," he said finally. "Just come in. We'll renegotiate your role. Title, compensation, full recognition." Recognition. The word tasted hollow. I'd spent years offering brilliance while being handed breadcrumbs labeled gratitude. "Lucas, this isn't about a title," I said quietly. "This is about integrity, something you only remember when it threatens your quarterly reports." I could hear movement on his end, a door closing, the muffled voices of legal counsel fading into silence. "If you won't do it for the company," he said, voice tightening, "do it for the people affected. The drivers, the dispatchers. None of them deserve this." That part almost got me. Almost. Because I had thought about them every time the headlines mentioned stalled shipments and unpaid overtime. I built Atlas for efficiency and fairness, for a system that didn't sacrifice human sanity for profit margins. But Lucas had corrupted that purpose. "You're right," I said slowly. They don't deserve this. Which is why Atlas will return, just not under you." The silence stretched. "You're holding us hostage," he snapped, anger flaring back now that he'd sensed refusal. "You think the industry won't blacklist you for this?" "You think they can?" I replied. "The ledger's public. Every partner now knows exactly who wrote Atlas and who broke it." His breathing hitched, a sound like realization clawing at pride. "So, what do you want, Erin?" Finally, the real question. "A partnership," I said evenly. "But not with you, with the company. A new entity, Latticeworks AI. I'll license Atlas through it, maintain oversight, enforce ethical compliance. You get your system back, and I ensure it never gets exploited again." He exhaled sharply. "That's extortion. That's accountability." I could hear papers rustling, the shuffle of panic disguised as pragmatism. He was already calculating how to spin this as a negotiation, how to survive another quarter. "The board will never agree," he said. "They already did," I answered, forwarding the signed memorandum of intent that had hit my inbox an hour earlier. Silence again. Longer this time. "They cut me out," he murmured, disbelief swallowing his tone. "Yes," I said softly. "Just like you cut me out. Funny how the system keeps symmetry." For the first time in all the years I'd known him, Lucas didn't sound arrogant or performative. He just sounded small. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "Build something that works the way it was supposed to," I said. "Transparent, accountable, human." He didn't reply. The line stayed open for several seconds, long enough for me to hear the sound of defeat settling in his throat. Then it clicked dead. I stared at the dark glass of my window, the city lights flickering like neural nodes. The confrontation was over, but the equation was still resolving itself. Justice, not revenge, an algorithmic correction long overdue. The fall wasn't cinematic. It unfolded like a sequence of press releases, leaked memos, and stock alerts. The world didn't see one big explosion. They saw a controlled detonation stretched across 48 hours. The company's public relations team scrambled to spin the narrative, but the truth was already loose. Financial analysts dissected the failure like surgeons. "Over-centralized decision-making," one headline read. "A textbook case of ethical negligence," said another. "Shareholders demanded transparency. Regulators demanded compliance logs." Lucas's name started appearing beside phrases like executive mismanagement and structural overreach. The irony was that he'd spent years branding himself as the company's visionary. Now that vision had become a cautionary tale. Overnight, Atlas Systems went from the golden standard of predictive logistics to a headline about hubris. Journalists replayed his demo clip in slow motion, the confidence, the gestures, the moment the screens froze. They turned it into metaphor, the face of collapse. Investors called emergency meetings. Freight partners filed breach of contract suits. Analysts projected a 22% loss in market value. Behind closed doors, the board negotiated in silence, trying to secure the only lifeline left, Latticeworks. Within a week, the partnership was announced. The language was diplomatic, but everyone knew the truth. Erin Voss had been reinstated not by apology, but by necessity. Across the industry, a shift began. Competitors introduced new ethical compliance standards. Universities cited Atlas in white papers. The scandal wasn't just about one company. It was about the fragility of power built without integrity. Lucas, meanwhile, became a ghost of his own narrative. His social media went dark. His phone number was disconnected. A rumor circulated that he'd left the country. The man who once filled stages now couldn't fill a room. When the dust settled, Atlas Systems operated again, quieter, leaner, and humbler. But something fundamental had changed. Shareholders no longer asked, "How fast can we grow?" They asked, "How do we not become Atlas?" And that was the truest collapse of all, not in value, but in myth. When everything stopped spinning, I finally noticed the silence. Not the cold, suffocating kind from before, but a calm that felt earned. I moved my desk by the window in the Latticeworks office. Morning light hit the metal frame of my monitor, the reflections soft and golden. The servers hummed quietly, stable, like they were breathing again. For the first time in years, I wasn't firefighting. I was designing. The emails from reporters went unanswered. The interview requests, the podcasts, the speaking panels, I declined them all. The story didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to whoever needed to believe that competence still wins eventually. My focus shifted inward. My team, our ethics board, the next generation prototype. Work became steady again, methodical, almost meditative. Sometimes when the office emptied, I'd stay late and walk the aisles between desks. The air smelled faintly of solder and coffee. On one monitor, a young engineer had left a note to self on a sticky pad. Code should never lie. I smiled at that. Maybe that was the real inheritance of Atlas, the quiet conviction that truth, once embedded, doesn't vanish. I'd been angry once, furious at being erased. Now I felt something different. Clarity. Lucas's downfall had stopped being the point a long time ago. The real satisfaction came from seeing systems work the way they should. Transparent, verifiable, fair. Watching my team collaborate without fear reminded me that revenge, at its best, isn't destruction. It's restoration. The partnership with Atlas continued under strict ethical oversight. Every update required dual authorization. Every audit was open source. No shortcuts. No hidden agendas. The board even asked me to review the company's internal mentorship policy, a gesture I accepted, not out of pride, but out of principle. I wanted the next Erin who came along to never have to build a failsafe, just to be safe. When people asked how it felt to win, I told them it wasn't about winning. It was about balance. The kind that lets you look at what was once chaos and finally see design. That night, before heading home, I shut down my workstation and caught my reflection in the glass, calm, centered. No bitterness left, only purpose. The war was over. The architecture stood, and for once it belonged to the right hands. 6 months after the collapse, the noise around Atlas had faded into a kind of reverent silence. Conferences cited the event as a turning point in AI governance. Universities added it to ethics curricula. I received invitations to panels, awards, speaking engagements, most of which I declined. I wasn't interested in fame. I was interested in building something that couldn't be corrupted. Latticeworks had grown faster than I anticipated. What started as a small reclamation team became a fully functioning company with its own research lab, compliance division, and design philosophy rooted in transparency. My engineers, people who'd once been afraid to question authority, now debated ideas openly, no one raising their voice to claim ownership. We documented every decision, every line of code, every rationale. If Atlas had been born from a system that rewarded silence, Latticeworks was its inversion, loud, questioning, collaborative. The irony was that the same corporations that once treated me as disposable were now lining up to license from us. Logistics, defense, healthcare, all wanted frameworks with built-in conscience. We didn't sell access lightly. Every contract required a human oversight clause, no black boxes, no unilateral control. If they refused, we walked away. I learned to measure success not by market share, but by refusal count. Every no protected the company's integrity. Lucas resurfaced briefly in an article about executive burnout. He'd joined a consultancy advising on leadership under pressure. I didn't read past the headline. His relevance had expired the moment Atlas locked him out. The reversal was complete, not because I had defeated him, but because his existence no longer defined my trajectory. Power didn't come from revenge. It came from restoration. Atlas was stable again under its new ethical license, and Latticeworks began developing its successor, the Helix engine, an adaptive network designed to learn accountability the way most people learn ambition, through reinforcement, not coercion. When investors questioned why I'd make the code partially open source, I told them the truth. If a system can't survive transparency, it doesn't deserve to exist. That became our motto, printed across the entrance wall in clean white letters. We hired interns straight from community programs instead of elite universities. I wanted curiosity, not pedigree. Watching them build under principles I once had to fight for felt like undoing history, one algorithm at a time. Some evenings, I'd stay late and walk through the quiet office, the hum of servers, and the soft reflection of code across glass panels. I'd think about the day Lucas told me I was too slow for progress, and how speed had nearly destroyed him. Progress wasn't velocity, it was direction. I had found mine. The reversal wasn't loud or cinematic, it was slow, deliberate, inevitable. Every ethical audit passed, every partnership vetted, every employee empowered. In rebuilding something that worked the way it should have from the start, I'd done more than outlast the people who doubted me. I'd rewritten the standard for what lasting power looks like, not dominance, but design that endures because it doesn't depend on deceit. 2 years after the Atlas freeze, I stood in the same auditorium where Lucas had once unveiled his empire. The screens were smaller now, the lighting softer, the banners replaced with a simple phrase across the stage. Transparency is strength. I wasn't there to gloat or retell the past. I was there to speak about what came next. The audience was a mix of engineers, students, and executives who'd learned the hard way that innovation without ethics was just vanity in faster motion. I told them what Atlas had taught me, that systems remember what people forget, that code written with integrity doesn't need defense because truth becomes its own firewall. When the applause came, it felt different, not explosive, not performative, sincere. Afterward, I walked the quiet halls alone, past conference rooms filled with new faces who would never know the sharp sting of being erased. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not wealth, but the normalization of fairness as a design principle. Latticeworks had grown into something stable and self-sustaining, no longer defined by crisis but by continuity. We'd launched Helix, the successor to Atlas, a network built with embedded self-auditing protocols that ensured no one could ever weaponize it against its own architect. Watching it run was like watching evolution correct itself. I thought of Lucas only in passing, the way one remembers a storm after blue skies return. Necessary, but gone. He hadn't destroyed me. He'd refined me. Every misstep he took had forced me closer to clarity. My name no longer lived in code. It lived in principles that guided the next generation of engineers, the ones who would never again have to hide their signatures to protect their work. The industry changed not because I fought it, but because I proved that conscience scales. Standing there, looking out over rows of bright eyes ready to build, I finally understood the quiet satisfaction that had eluded me for so long. The best revenge was never disruption. It was permanence. Systems fail, titles fade, companies rebrand, but design that values integrity outlives them all. They erased my name from the project. But it was still in the code, Always was. I used to think preparation was about being fast, about proving I could outwork and outthink anyone in the room. But when everything collapsed, I realized the real strength wasn't in speed. It was in quiet, patient readiness. Hidden strength doesn't make headlines, and it rarely earns praise in boardrooms, but it's the one thing that never betrays you when arrogance walks in wearing confidence as armor. The day Lucas cut me off the project, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just opened my encrypted backup, reviewed my documentation, and executed the failsafe I'd designed years earlier. Not out of revenge, but because I never trusted a system that rewarded recklessness over respect. That was my lesson. Calm preparation outlives chaos. If you work in any organization, tech, logistics, healthcare, doesn't matter. Never assume systems protect fairness. They protect power. If you want safety, you have to build it yourself, layer by layer. Here's what I learned the hard way. 1. Document everything, even when it feels paranoid. Emails, approvals, code logs, meeting notes, these are your invisible armor. They speak clearly when no one else will. Never let loyalty replace awareness. You can respect leadership without surrendering judgment. Blind loyalty is what arrogance feeds on. Design your work to tell the truth. Whether it's a line of code, a report, or a process, embed integrity in it. Make deceit expensive. Build slow if you must, but build right. People who rush for glory never see the cracks forming under their own feet. When Lucas's empire began to unravel, I didn't celebrate his fall. I watched it like an equation resolving itself, inputs of deceit producing outputs of collapse. And that, I've realized, is the best kind of revenge, not punishment, but proof. Proof that structure without substance can't stand, and truth, when embedded carefully, doesn't need your defense. How to get started today. Create a personal evidence trail. Start with one folder that contains your key contributions with dates and context. Learn your contracts. Understand every clause that touches your ownership, rights, or authorship. Build habits of backup and reflection. Weekly notes, short summaries of your decisions. Treat integrity as part of your workflow, not a moral accessory. Preparation isn't paranoia, it's survival dressed in professionalism. What about you? Have you ever built something that could outlast the people trying to erase you? Tell me below.